Welcome to Humanist Views, a program where we look at current issues from a humanist point of view. I'm Scott Lohman. On tonight's program, we're going to do a little more personal look at humanism, atheism, and all thoughts sundry related to free thought, because we're going to take a look at a personal journey by a local free thought celebrity in our area, and take a look at his personal journey from being a believer to being a non-believer. And I know I listen to Christian radio from time to time in our city, and they like to interview people on the opposite, their journey to Christianity. So it's always nice to know that we have the same sort of journeys on our side, and they're equally as fascinating and interesting. My guest tonight is August Berkshire. Welcome, August.
Thank you, Scott.
And August is the current president of Minnesota Atheists. He's been a past board member of the Humanist of Minnesota Board of Directors, and he's been a Humanist of the Year for the Humanist of Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we've had a long association with you. Yeah. So what has prompted you putting this together? I know your group is putting together a fascinating project around this.
Right. There's a new publishing house called Free Thought House, and they're putting out a new book called Atheist Voices of Minnesota.
Okay.
And it's essays from, I think, 36 different authors. And they're more personal essays about their personal journeys from religion to atheism, or being an atheist, or the experience of being an atheist, say, in school, in public, in their jobs.
Okay.
So it's more than just, here's why religion's not true. It's more the personal journeys that are in this book.
Yeah, kind of the thought process of them going through their life and going from, I believe this, to, no, it's crazy, I'm not going to believe that anymore.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a cool resource to have, and when is that going to be published?
Right now it's slated for late August 2012.
Okay, so depending on when you look at this program on our website, you can see if we're past August, then go look for it. It'll probably be available from all the standard publishers, or you can buy it from a local bookstore and do support for them. And it's got a great cover. I like that. We've got it up on the screen. Okay. So that just is kind of nice and perky. I like that.
And that artwork was done by a local artist that I should give a plug to, Lynn Fellman.
Okay.
Fellman Studios in the downtown Minneapolis area.
And a previous guest on this program, too. She's very cool. Yeah. So let's get started just at the beginning. So how did you start your essay out?
Well, I talked about how I was brought up. I was brought up a Roman Catholic in small towns in New England. And back then, everyone I knew was a Christian, and pretty much a Roman Catholic. Roman Catholicism is really big in Massachusetts. So when everyone you know is a Christian, your parents are Christian, and they're all very sincere about belief, and they're telling you this stuff, and they're obviously right about so many other things, you just assume they must be right about this too. I was even an altar boy, and that was a fun experience.
Oh, sure.
I did it with my brother. Like most kids, and even I as an adult now, would find sitting out in the pews rather boring.
Oh, yeah.
Because especially with the Catholic Mass, it's pretty much the same thing every week. They have their fixed prayers, and the sermon would be different a little each week. But as a kid, a sermon is really boring. So.
Oh, definitely. I used to refer to it as the long talk in mine. And one of my goals one time was to try and flip through the entire hymnal. My dad shut me down on that one.
Okay. So at least being an altar boy, you got to be up there and important, and you had to memorize your moves, and so it was interesting. I enjoyed it.
Well, yeah, that's interesting because we do share a bit of this similar background. I was brought up in Lutheran church here in southeastern Minnesota, and so then I also did the thing help with, and in the Lutheran church, it's referred to as an acolyte. So your job was like a couple of times every year, you would help light the candles, and if you got lucky, well, some guys liked it and some didn't, you got to help with communion, which means you followed the pastor and they put the empty little sippy cups into your tray.
Okay.
So you got some extra stuff on that. So.
Yeah. Well, and ironically, it was being an altar boy that planted some of the early seeds of my later atheism, although I didn't realize it at the time.
Okay.
The Catholic Mass is a wonderful ritual, but when you're an altar boy, you kind of get to see behind the scenes. You're on stage, and suddenly the altar and its surrounding area looks like a stage.
Okay.
And the priest is an actor, and he's the magic man, and you've got a magic book. You have props. The chalice is a prop. You have costumes, the robes, the wine, the communion wafers.
Whatever that smoking thing is.
Yeah, and you get to go behind the scenes, behind the stage, because there's a prep room where you go beforehand to put your robes on and afterwards to take them off. And you see that from the audience point of view, the magic wine that you only see in the chalice when you're in the audience, you see it comes out of a bottle, and you see where the bottle is stored, and it's just normal wine. And the wafers, which, again, in the audience, you just see them in the chalice. You don't. Behind the scenes, they're just in a bag, and they're in the closet, and they've been cooked in a nunnery. And the magic guy who's in this splendid robe, well, he takes it off and hangs it up, and he's just a normal, nice guy. And the priests that I knew were very nice people, but they didn't have any special knowledge that I could tell. You know, they were trying to do a good job and be pastoral toward the parishioners, but I didn't see, you know, any divine divination messages coming from them.
Yeah, any special powers or special insights. Yeah, when you see the human side of those things, it tends to go, you know, they're not really any different than me.
Yeah, and then, you know, at that time when you're a kid, you watch a lot of National Geographics and stuff, and I didn't, in the essence, see any difference between a Catholic Mass and natives worshiping a god dancing around a fire. I really didn't see any difference. And I started to realize that all religions think that they're true, and that religion is really an accident of geography. And if I had been born in Israel, I'd be a Jew. If I had been born in India, I could be a Hindu. If I had been born in Saudi Arabia, I'd be a Muslim. It's just an accident of where I was born and how I was brought up as to what I believe. And you can't use that as to the truth of a religion. So then I thought, well, how am I going to determine which is the true religion? And at the same time, I was studying a lot of science in school. And every time there was something presented in science, they talked about the experiments and the logic, but mainly also the evidence, the physical evidence that they had for this or that. And you could do experiments. So I thought, well, reason and evidence seem to work really well for science. And I'm going to apply reason and evidence to religion to try to figure religion out. And when I did that, none of them seemed to have any evidence that I could tell. And they didn't seem reasonable for other reasons as well. So, yeah, from altar boy and then into science and realizing that religion is an accident of geography. These were some of the early doubts that I was starting to have.
So with those, then, did you start looking at other philosophies, or did you find books that then got you moving a little further?
I sometimes joke that if I couldn't accept the one true religion, well, then I couldn't accept any of them. But then, of course, every religion thinks it's the one true religion.
Yes. All the rest of them are blasphemy.
I can't say as I did this huge, exhaustive comparative religion search. It really did impress me that religious, quote, knowledge was geographical and scientific knowledge was international. That if you had a scientific truth, it didn't matter what country you were in. It was true in all the countries. And I didn't see any particular religion convincing everybody else that it was true. I saw the power of indoctrination at work. So I mainly just was kind of introspective. And also I was finding internal contradictions with not just the Christian God, but the typical God that people believe in. The typical God is all love. Pretty much any religion believes that God's all love. Well, then we have the problem of evil, especially the problem of natural evil.
Exactly,
Natural disasters, birth defects, diseases, things like that, where free will played no part. So that was something I could never figure out, why a loving God would have this wanton cruelty. The harm or evil that humans do to each other could be explained as a misuse of our free will. So you don't blame God for that. I didn't have a problem with that. But, you know, was somebody who was really, really sick during their lives somehow better or experiencing God's love more than someone who just chanced to be really healthy? I mean, I just saw no rhyme or reason to it. The universe was operating the way I would expect it to, randomly, if there was no God in charge. But I would expect a different universe if there was a loving God in charge of it. And I just didn't see. That was an internal contradiction I was seeing.
Yeah, and when you start doing that, then most of us that then go over to atheism can't maintain that cognitive dissonance in their heads or in our heads. It's once it's like, okay, this doesn't make any sense. It's not adding up. One of these things has got to go. And for you and I, it's reality that we stayed with, and it was the religion we moved to the fiction.
Right. And I made a commitment early on that I'm just going to follow this path of reason and evidence wherever it leads. I didn't start out to try to be an atheist. I just saw some contradictions, saw some problems. So I'm going to take this journey. In fact, my essay is called My Road to Atheism.
Okay.
It was truly a journey. I didn't know where it was going to end up. I did have some suspicions that, I might end up not believing in this God, and that might make me uncomfortable, but I was willing to face that. Willing to face the fact that, maybe there's no God, there's no divine intervention, there's no heaven to go to. But I'll get to that when I come to that.
Okay.
But,
Yeah, that's always, one of the, an imposing step for people is once you get past the no God, then you start looking at the no afterlife, and I think that scares quite a few people.
Yeah, and I was just willing to let the chips fall where they may. So that
Okay.
was a courage that a lot of us have when we make this journey. And you're right, there's a lot of religious people that afterlife is the big barrier. They can give up, no divine intervention here on earth, because they don't really see it anyway. God's not intervening, we're helping each other anyway. But the afterlife, no, we haven't found a way to provide that or eternal life ourselves in some way. So yeah, you still need a God if you want that.
Yeah, and that scares a lot of people. So then, at that stage, what did you start looking at or thinking about or pondering or?
Well, I was looking still at the Catholic doctrine, and I like the message of we're all God's children and God loves us all. But then, why do they have this original sin? And many Christian churches have this baptism ceremony.
Oh, yeah.
So, but original sin, that you're born in sin, made no sense to me. It was unjust to be punished for the sins of Adam and Eve.
Yeah, just because you arrived.
Right, so that's unfair, and that contradicts with an all-just God, this injustice. Then, why couldn't women be priests? Okay, why are men somehow better? Why does God favor men more than women? That was unjust. That made no sense. What about gays? Well, I knew a gay kid in junior high. I don't even know if I knew the word gay, but we knew what was happening. And he was a good kid. There's no reason So it's like we're all born in this hole due to original sin, only gays are born in an even deeper hole because they have their original sin plus their sexuality.
Yep, well, there'd be the men and then the women and then the gays.
Yeah. So this was a contradiction I saw within the Catholic Church. And I thought, well, okay, maybe the Catholic Church, it's obviously, white men, but in fact, back then it was hugely white, back in the 70s. So you've got these white old men, it's a power hierarchy. Okay, that's obviously not true. But again, I just didn't see any other, so that made me doubt that particular religion, but not God itself yet.
Okay.
And then it was problem of evil, which is the more generic God problem.
Yep.
It's not confined to just the Catholic Church. So that's when I went from disbelieving my own religion to disbelieving all religions to disbelieving in God itself.
Yeah, that's a pretty standard steps that a lot of people go through. I've looked at ones of some national figures on that, and they usually start with, seeing the flaws in their own belief system, and then going, okay, well, maybe this one's not great. We'll just try the one that's down the road just a little bit and discovering, oh, it's got some of the same flaws. So then they move to spirituality. Did you ever get into that phase?
No, because that wasn't trendy. I was already an atheist by the time that became trendy.
Okay.
I was an atheist by the early 80s, and that the new agey stuff came in after. I was already an atheist.
So you're seeing the flaws in the Catholic Church, but you're not quite ready then to give up the God part. So what was your in-between stage there?
Well, another thing, I was looking at the Bible, which is common to all Christianity, and I was realizing I couldn't take everything in there literally. Adam and Eve's story was obviously fiction to me. The Great Flood, flooding the whole earth, that was fiction. So I thought, okay, maybe these are, first I tried to find a way they could be true. And, when you're in junior high, you're usually a big fan of science fiction, especially if you're a boy geek like I'm sure we were.
Oh, yes.
So I think like Land of the Giants was on, where they could,
Okay.
where the people were small, and Fantastic Voyage by
Yep.
Isaac Asimov, where they shrunk people. So that was how God did Noah and the ark. He miniaturized all the animals and put them in suspended animation.
There you go.
I mean, with God, all things are possible, and so he certainly could have done this. So I can't, and when God makes the sun stand still for Joshua so he can fight more and kill some more people. Well, of course, the sun doesn't really go around the earth. To make the sun stand still, you've got to stop the earth. And if you were to suddenly stop the earth, everything would fly off due to momentum. Well, God simply cancels momentum.
There you go.
But I kind of got tired of making excuses for God. And the idea that these were just stories, fanciful stories, seem to be more likely than God pulling these magic tricks.
Yeah, it's almost like the process when they were figuring out that whether the sun rotated around the earth or whether it was the earth going around the sun, when their math kept getting more complicated in order to make it work to keep the sun going around that. It's when you start seeing, I got to stick too many things in there to keep this thing up. And doing that. So, yeah, it's interesting that you're working on at least trying to go for their plausibility in that, but then seeing the holes in the stories.
Yeah. So then, okay, let's say Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and Noah in the ark, let's say they're metaphorical. Well, what's the message? Well, it's a terrible message.
Yes.
Adam and Eve get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and all the descendants suffer for it. That's unjust. And Noah in the ark, God drowns just about everybody on earth. Well, that's unjust too.
Definitely.
So the message is terrible, even if they're just metaphors.
Not to mention all of the massacres in the Old Testament once you get into that section.
And so then I kind of realized, well, what else might be metaphor? Did Jesus really resurrect? Or is that a metaphor just to give people hope for the afterlife? And then I started to think what fundamentalists often say is if you don't take every bit of the Bible literally, it throws the whole thing open to question, and that's what's happened with me.
Okay.
The whole thing's open to question, and it's like if you're reading a math book, and you read, 2 + 2 is 4, that makes sense, 3 + 3 is 6, okay, and then 5 + 5 is 11. Well, wait, that's wrong. So then suddenly, well, what other mistakes might be?
You start checking for the other problems in there. So then you're at the point where it's now you're giving up on the Bible. So it's like, okay, so then were you still believing in a God at that point, or was that starting to get a little fuzzy?
Well, then we ran into the problem of silence. I had never felt the presence of a God in my life. When I prayed, you're supposed to pray before you go to bed. Go to confession, say some prayers as your penance, which is kind of weird too, because prayer is being a punishment instead of being something positive. You start looking at prayers as something negative. But, I would, when I was young, say prayers before I go to bed, and I never felt there was anything listening to me. And later on, I saw the movie The Ruling Class with Peter O'Toole.
Okay.
And Peter O'Toole plays a crazy son of a guy who's in the House of Lords, which is an inherited position. Well, the old man dies, and Peter O'Toole's character is now going to be in the House of Lords, but he's nutty as a fruitcake. And he thinks he's Jesus.
Okay.
And he walks around with robes and a cross and kind of drapes himself on the cross once in a while. And at one point, someone else in the movie asks him, well, how do you know you're God? And he says, well, because every time I pray, I find that I'm talking to myself. And I thought, yeah, that's how I feel when I say a prayer, that I'm talking to myself. Not that I thought of myself as God, but I did realize that, okay, I'm talking to myself. We're alone here. There is no God on this earth. And so we're gods in the sense that we have to help each other. We're the ultimate source of help because there is nothing higher helping us out.
Yeah, we've got to figure out the solutions ourselves. So just the not answer to prayers or feeling like that was just kind of the last thing to push sort of God into imagination.
Well, I kind of felt that God is supposed to be all powerful, and He supposedly created me with the mind I have, which was trying to be very logical. And if He was logical, couldn't He present Himself in a way that I could figure Him out? He supposedly knows how I think. Kind of the burden's on Him if He's all powerful.
Exactly.
And I wasn't dismissing the idea that he might exist. I just didn't see any evidence, and the silence was just so overwhelming, and the pieces just fit together better if there was no God. It eliminated the contradiction of the problem of evil. It eliminated the problem of silence, because of course if God's not there, he's going to be silent.
He's not going to talk much.
Yeah, so just everything fit together better in a worldview that lacked a God. So like I said, I wasn't trying to be an atheist, but that's just kind of where the road led.
Yeah, and also, in the 70s, that's when the space program was really big. And for me, being into science fiction and that, starting to head up into space and going, okay, well, we should be able to see heaven up there. And it's like, no, we're not seeing it any place.
You're right. That's something I thought about too, is, we had telescopes even before we went to the moon. Where is this heaven? Where is this hell? It's not in the center of the earth. I mean, we kind of know what the earth is composed of, and there's not beings down there and a devil with a pitchfork. So where are these mythical places?
Yeah, because that, and again, you mentioned reading science fiction. Is that where do you put these other locations? And if it's not here, then you create a world, and it's like, okay, well, you need specific conditions to get to that, and it's like, okay, that's not in the neighborhood. So
it took me probably about 3 years to intellectually become an atheist, from my first doubts to when I would have called myself an atheist, maybe starting 17-ish to 20. And so I thought, okay, I'm an atheist. And I had seen Madalyn Murray O'Hair, who was the founder and former president of American Atheists, on probably a Phil Donahue show during the early 1980s. So that, you'll find that was the first atheist I'd ever seen. Actually, I didn't know anyone else who was an atheist. I just, at that point, just saw her on TV and said, yeah, this makes sense. So, lost my train of thought here. Oh, I remember now. So I become an atheist intellectually. It took about 3 years. And then my driver's license came up for renewal.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, I don't believe in an afterlife. My organs, I should donate them. I'm not going to need them anymore. I'm dead. When you're dead, you're dead. Sure, it would be nice if someone did that for me. So my driver's license comes up for renewal, and there's a box on it for organ donor.
Okay.
And I thought, well, logically, I should check this. I am an atheist. I should logically check this. But why am I feeling squeamish? Why am I not checking this box? And I realized I had this idea that I would somehow feel these organs being taken out of my body after I was dead. Well, where was this coming from? Oh, this idea that you have sensation after death is a religious idea. Oh, okay, I guess I'm not fully an atheist in some ways, emotionally.
Okay, yeah.
Because logically, I knew this wasn't true. And then I realized some other emotional things, religiously emotional things that were still in me.
Okay.
And it took me like another 3 years to kind of work through some of those issues.
Okay.
And
What were some of those issues you were dealing with that were emotion related?
I think just guilt for no reason. I mean, Catholics are famous for their guilt.
Oh, yeah.
So that was another issue. Human sexuality has all kinds of crazy Christian quirks to it that I had to
reprogram your brain for on that. I'm amazed more people, well, we know a lot of people are messed up by that.
So finally, when my driver's license came up for renewal again 4 years later, I checked the organ donor box with no qualms, no second thoughts, and it was kind of like a rite of passage for me. Okay. Now I am intellectually and emotionally an atheist. I'm a complete atheist at that point. And that was in my early 20s. And then in 1984, Madalyn Murray O'Hair and American Atheists started a chapter here in the Twin Cities. And I had been on their mailing list and was interested. And I became the co-founder and first president of the Twin Cities chapter of American Atheists in 1984. Talk about going from one extreme to the other. But it's funny, the atheist leadership in the 1980s was disproportionately ex-Catholic.
Yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon in our movements in some places.
Yeah. So I was president of the Twin Cities chapter of American Atheists from 1984 to 88. In 1991, American Atheists disbanded its chapters and we reincorporated as Minnesota Atheists. So from doubts to president of the Twin Cities chapter of American Atheists. And in fact, that's how I came out to my parents, is that here we're planning putting this chapter together, and John Murray, the son of Madeline Murray O'Hare, had called the Star Tribune and said, "Oh, by the way, there's a chapter starting.
Okay.
And this guy is the leader, and you might want to call him." I was totally unprepared. He didn't tell me he had done that. So the Star Tribune reporter calls me, and we did an interview.
Okay.
And then a couple of days later, there I am in the Metro section or the Variety section or something, and my parents who had no idea the thought process that was going on. Suddenly their son, his picture and his name is,
in the newspaper.
In the news. So I had to run home, and because I knew they'd be kind of, and there's the typical reaction is, where did we go wrong? I said, you didn't go wrong. You took me to church. You took me to Sunday school.
And you taught me how to think for myself and solve problems.
I just don't believe it. And if it makes you feel any better, I don't believe any of it from any source. I don't believe any other religion. I don't believe anything supernatural, ghosts, gods, heaven, hell. So the fact that it was a more general thing and not just a specific rejection of their faith,
right,
but a whole rejection of the whole worldview.
All of them, yes.
It made him feel slightly
a little better. There.
But we still did go through 10 years of estrangement.
Okay.
And it's almost like I had to prove myself as an atheist, like somehow they suspected I was going to be different. But then they saw that I was still the same son I had ever been, and was as loving and caring as I had ever been. And so then they realized, well, they had to get rid of some of their stereotypes about atheists. And many parents find this. I hear this story from many other of our members.
Yeah, and mine sort of went through the same thing, because I sort of came out to them by sending them a copy of the newsletter for the Humanist when I was president, telling about sort of my journey. It's like, hello, you can read this.
Wow.
So, but that was one way to do it, is coming out in print in the sort of the same way.
Yeah. But did your parents realize that you were an atheist? I mean, you were.
They may have had inklings that I didn't really think much of it, because we always looked upon religion as Sunday mornings, and after that it didn't enter into any factors in the other part of the week. And since Lutherans don't have the confession thing, there's not that stuff going on. It's a whole different animal. And doing the other activities with the church, social activities and things like that, doesn't require you to give a statement of belief in order to do those sort of things. So,
well, I was just thinking, at the time you would have come out, most Christians wouldn't have known what the word humanist was.
That is very correct.
And so they would have seen your humanist newsletter, not necessarily equated it with atheism.
True, but I did say, there was no belief stated in there. So then they got that. And fortunately, our humanist newsletter has a few basics on humanism in each newsletter. So we've got that so they can get it. Because mostly when you tell people you're humanist, you get this odd stare of like, humanitarian, what sort of thing is that? So it takes a little more, because it's a logical thing for you, because you basically, you and I use the same phrase, that we're an atheist in belief but a humanist in philosophy.
Yeah.
Meaning we don't believe in gods or the supernatural. So then where does that bring us?
Right.
And so then that's where the philosophy of humanism comes in.
Right. How do you live your life then?
Yeah, and so, but at this point, we're out of time.
Okay.
So that worked really well. I appreciate you coming on the
Scott.
show. And the book is going to be Atheist Voices of Minnesota, coming out in August of 2012. So look for it. There'll be information on the Minnesota Atheist website, as well as probably on the Humanist of Minnesota website. So look for it. I want to thank you for joining me in this edition of Humanist Views. I'm Scott Lohman. Good night.